What's up, guys? Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Ben Prentice. Ben is the co-creator of the website WTF Happened in 1971.com. So if you're not familiar with this website, it's very simple, but it's very powerful. It's a one-pager of just a number of different charts showcasing the changes that occurred on many different metrics, from crime rates to money supply growth and many, many other things that took place in 1971. And of course, it begs the viewer or the visitor to ask, what the fuck happened in 1971? And as Bitcoiners, we know what happened in 1971. This is when the gold window was closed entirely. But it's a great resource for sending to people that maybe are just beginning on this journey of learning about money, learning about the monetary system, and learning about monetary history. And so I thought it would be cool just to get Ben on and, as usual, have a chat with him, talk a little bit about the project, the website, the motivations behind it, what the response has been like, and then, of course, also just have a jam session about Bitcoin. So that's it. Hope you enjoy.
Let's do it.
Yeah, man. So if you're ready to crack into it, why don't you just tell me kind of, your Bitcoin story, how you got involved, and what kind of you see your role as in contributing to the space right now.
Are we doing this pre-recording or?
No, we're live, buddy.
Oh, we're live. Thanks. So I've known about Bitcoin for a really long time, and I think there are a lot of people today that know, that think they know about it. They've heard about it. They've seen it on TV. They've heard people talk about it. They might even have a positive or a negative or a very neutral stance. And I kind of had a neutral stance. I learned a little bit about it, 2011, 2012, on Slashdot, and I looked at it, and I didn't, obviously I didn't grok it. I understood that it was this money that lived on the internet or something like that, and it was decentralized, and I understood a little bit about the tech as well, but I said I don't really think that's gonna work, and
Right.
it kind of kept working for the next few years, and I think somewhere around 2014. It was still doing things, and there were people who were buying drugs on the internet and stuff. And I was like, maybe I should take another look at this. And then I understood it as, so my understanding kind of started to evolve, and I understood it as anonymous money that was completely anonymous on the internet, and that made sense too. And I was like, oh, maybe I should get some. I don't know, maybe I'll buy some weed or something on the internet. And I tried to get some, and they asked for your license, your KYC and stuff. And I was like, well, this isn't anonymous. So I closed up the Mt. Gox window, and I put it in the back of my head that I'd find one of these ATMs someday, and I kind of fell off of it until 2017, when I was like, wow, this is not only still a thing, but it seems to be growing in some way, and I don't feel like I understand what it is. And the more I learned about it, the deeper and deeper I fell down this rabbit hole, and now I'm here talking with you.
Yeah, and so you are the co-creator of the website WTF Happened in 1971, right?
Yes. So this is in my rabbit hole searches, one of the things that we were looking at, or I was looking at personally a lot, was what happened in 1929, and one of the places I was doing a little bit of research on, what happened there, was Wikipedia, and I found a few charts there that just really surprised me, and I got kind of addicted to finding these charts about monetary history, because I think data over time starts to tell a little bit of a story, and it's easier for people to understand. I was using it so I could understand what the hell happened since 1929 even, really.
Yeah.
But then I started finding all this stuff when the break of Bretton Woods happened, when our money was put into pure fiat. I started finding all these charts right around 1971 that just seemed so crazy, that all of them just go nuts, starting right after 1971. If you look back and decades or even centuries of normality, that normality just disappears, and they all break, something fundamental broke. And I was joking with Colin from the Bitcoin Echo Chamber, heavily armed clown, And he's like, why don't we just like make this a meme? Like, what the fuck happened in 1971? And when I was like, that's a good idea. And I had already at this point amassed like a whole bunch of charts, because sometimes when I'm arguing with people on the internet, I'm like, oh yeah, well here's the chart. Like, look, you guys don't know what you're talking about. And I think it's actually really interesting because we don't write. The website's very bare, right? We just wrote what the WTF happened in 1971, and we just put a whole bunch of charts on there, and we let the reader draw their own conclusion. We're not necessarily trying to explain anything. We're just showing here's a bunch of data. What's going on?
Right. Yeah, I mean it's such a I mean a lot of us that are in the space and gold bugs prior to Bitcoiners, for those of us who fall into that category, you know that those are dates rather that we've been obviously very aware of and and something that we focus on and try to explain to people, when we're talking about the merits of these types of investments, different forms of money, whether they be gold or Bitcoin or whatever. But I'd love the positioning of the website, not only because it's kind of in, modern colloquial language like WTF, but it kind of makes you want to, like it literally seeds your brain with the question, like, what the fuck did happen in 1971? Like,
Yeah,
why is that a
yeah.
noteworthy date? It implies that it is a noteworthy date. And I love the positioning of it. And then it's super simple, right? You just basically, it's just, I'm looking at it now, it's just a bunch of charts. But you're right, and it's impossible to ignore. And I think what's great about the website is you go there, right? Maybe someone introduces it to you, or you happen upon it, and you look at it, and you look at all these charts, and you just see like enormous divergence from the trend at 1971. And I
Yeah.
think more than anything, because the website doesn't tell you anything other than something changed, and it obviously shows some of the metrics on which the change was measured, but it inspires you to ask yourself, like, why, and what's the implications of that?
Is there some kind of fundamental change that happened here,
Right.
and does it have implications? Right.
And so, what's
Yeah.
kind of been the first of all, when did the site go up, and what's been the feedback from it, or on it rather?
Oh, yeah. We've only had the site up for 2 or 3 months,
Oh,
and
really?
we've already seen a few people kind of referencing it. I've heard it dropped briefly in a pod here and there. Murad Mahmudov
Yep.
was doing a presentation recently at Baltic Honey Badger, and he referenced the chart and said, I encourage you all to go look at these charts and see what happened here. He referenced the website. So far the feedback's been good. We haven't really been shilling it that much, but when somebody memes it and says WTF happened, we always try to retweet it and stuff. But I think it's nascent. We don't like to overmarket things, and we like to let them develop organically. And I think that's slowly happening.
Sure. I feel like there's, I don't know what your approach is in terms of kind of trying to keep it as, what level of concise you're looking for. But I feel like there's probably a lot, now that I've seen this, I feel like there's probably a lot of other charts and data out there that may, that, because one of yours, I think, is one of the ones included here is the divorce rate, right?
Yeah,
Um,
fascinating. It's,
yeah.
it's
And so,
divorce rate by age bucket.
yeah, and I do want to break into that, but I got to imagine there's lots of other metrics out there. I can't. I mean, whatever. Can't think of any off the top of my head, but like behavior change, or like large scale social change that can be represented graphically from 1971. Like, what was the crime rate like, and what was the drug use rate like, and what was the, I don't know, consumer packaged goods, like maybe there's
Yeah,
other interesting charts that continue to tell the story in a broader capacity.
right. And I don't think we're necessarily trying to say, oh, it was the breaking the gold standard that caused the divorce rate to go up. But we're also not saying that. And we're also constantly looking for charts. And we think, I believe, as Bitcoiners, we're generally in consensus that because the underlying system of money is so fundamentally distorting the way that markets assign value to things, and people determine how to use those things within that market. That literally it's being distorted by the money supply, and by open market operations, and inflation itself. That it has a lot of second order effects. And one of the things I often talk about is that today it's quite clear that despite massive progress, technologically speaking, and really even if you look at health and worldwide poverty, and that we have actually progressed in some ways empirically as a society.
Hmm.
And yet, if we look at even like our my own country, the United States, that this is the quote unquote richest country in the world, quote unquote most powerful country in the world, and there's some very very fundamental large problems that seem to be kind of getting worse. And for what I describe the process of us trying to fix these problems is us running around trying to put out fires, us putting band-aid solutions on something that is broken because of the fundamental underlying system of money that underlies all exchange, right?
Hmm.
And that these attempts to go fix these things are almost fruitless. You're going around and putting on a band-aid at best, but you haven't fixed the underlying infection. And when you post something like the divorce rate prevalence by age bucket, that I had somebody say, hey, well, that was the year that birth control became widely available or something. And I said, that might be it. I'm not sure. I'm not trying to say this is just because of the break in the gold standard. But when you look at it with the incarceration rate and the inflation rate and the wealth disparity, it starts to paint a different story, I think, and it starts to paint a very big story, and a lot of fundamental changes happened in that day. I think that's my
Totally.
determination.
Yeah, I could not agree more with everything you just said. And I totally agree that we're in this time, and it's often cited, right? Everyone always says, life is as easy and as comfortable and as prosperous as it's ever been. But, I think we all also simultaneously look out on the world and see, like, well, sure. And part of it is definitely our mindset and what we focus on, and with the way that the mainstream news media works, and that, um, the fact that you're always kind of shown the worst elements of what's going on around the world. But that
Mhm.
notwithstanding, it does seem like, simultaneous to this prosperity and comfort that we're uniquely enjoying at this kind of frontier of time and history, there does seem to be a lot of tumultuous stuff going on, a lot of discontent, a lot of division and that kind of stuff. And I totally agree. I feel like all efforts to it's just it's like whack-a-mole. These things are popping up and you're hitting it as they pop up, rather than addressing the issue at the most fundamental level, which in my opinion, it sounds like it's yours as well, is the type and form and quality of money that a society or a civilization uses to basically organize, or that's the fundamental organizing mechanism of society. And, today, I've said this before on the podcast, but the a lot of the people, activists and social justice warriors and protesters today, I feel like, most of the time I think they're probably coming from a good place, albeit maybe maybe they could be better informed, and maybe they could do with removing some emotion from it, but I think they're probably coming from a good place. But I think they would all be better served if they devoted their attention, as you were just saying, to root cause rather than, the symptom. Rather than trying to put a band-aid on it, go for the root cause. And, I think us as Bitcoiners probably unanimously agree that the root cause is the money. And, why the website is so fascinating is because it's really illustrating that very clearly. It's not even drawing any conclusions, which is the most beautiful thing about it, because that means it can't be argued with, right? It's not like you guys are out there making a case. It's like, look, here's some data. What do you think it indicates,
Yeah. And we're almost unapproachable from that because we haven't really answered the question. But I think one of the interesting things you said there is that you said that in general it seems like we're more prosperous, and I'm hesitant to say that, but you use the word comfort, and I think that's super fascinating because in many ways that our life is much more comfortable than even like if we look 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or whatever. We have washing machines and all of these devices that automate tasks for us that increase our productivities as humans, just even in our day-to-day lives, not even in our jobs, that it makes doing simple things much more efficient. But what the word comfort also implies that you have comfort about the future, and I think that's one of the things that we're missing. So we look around and we say, it's very affordable to get these items like washing machines and dishwashers and all the microwaves that make our lives easier. But it's the comfort about the future that we've actually, I think, regressed on. That because we don't have a way to store value, that we are forced to gamble in the future, just to preserve our wealth. That it causes an extreme discomfort that is much less palpable, much less tangible to people. So they know something's wrong, but they don't really know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And one can argue that any place you store your money is a form of speculation, right? Like if you store your money in the US dollar, um, then that's a form of speculation. Or if you stored your money in gold in the past, that's speculation that gold is going to continue to be good money. And hey, by the way, it's done that for 5,000 years. But and we're, obviously, whereas Bitcoiners are speculating that Bitcoin will be a better store of value and a better money in the future, and that right now it's in its price discovery phase of some kind. But
Mm-hmm.
I think when a society converges on a money that isn't debased, that we have a way to preserve our value, and we have a way to be comfortable about the future, and
Mm-hmm.
the risk associated with that is is minimal, and the risk that is entailed in investing is an understood risk that isn't required just to preserve the value that we have. Investment can still happen under sound money, and of course it would, but that's separate from just being able to store value. And I don't know. I feel like people have a little issue with this, and maybe I'm not articulating it super well, but I think that our businesses and our governments and our people, everybody has to now take the money that they've earned, and Monsieur Mahmoudov talks about this as time, that we store our time work in our money, and it becomes time money.
Yep.
And recently, Robert Breedlove elucidated this phrase that just keeps rolling through my head, that this form of money we have is a institutionalized system of time theft, and it's a scourge on our society.
Mm-hmm.
That the time work that we put in and store in our time money is slowly debased away from us, so that now, if we want to preserve wealth for the future, we're required to take on all this, I'd say, undue risk, that we have to, gamble in the stock market or in commodities and other things. I think that's difficult and undue pressure on businesses and individuals, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I think you just used the word that was coming to my head, and it's pressure, right? Like if you have a
Hmm.
project, to complete, and it's a shit ton of work, and you got an hour to do it, or by the end of the day, or whatever. Basically, the amount of work exceeds the amount of time you have to complete it. Then it's going to cause that sense of pressure, anxiety, and all the kind of behavioral um, flares, or all the different behaviors that might emerge from someone who's in a more anxious state. And I think it's a pretty easy extrapolation to to the analogy that you just referenced that Robert made, in that if basically the way in which they're managing the money, i.e., they're stealing the time. It's like they're putting everybody behind the eight ball, and not even consciously, right? Like, as this plays out, it's fairly complex, so it plays out in a lot of different ways. But as a civilization, basically, it's almost like because of the way that people's time is kind of covertly being robbed, they're constantly being like pressured with having their time slip through their hands, right? And so that,
Hmm.
the pressure and anxiety that causes manifests in, God knows how many different ways, but certainly none of them, or very few of them are probably positive. And that's, reflected in some of the graphs that you've put on the site, and I'm sure many more. But these effects are so insidious that, I mean, obviously, for 99% of people, I'm sure they're not, consciously aware of how the quality of the money that, the society uses, and that which they are chasing through, committing their labor or time to a given effort, has, seemingly direct and profound impacts on their behavior, and how they feel, and how they act, and how they even perceive things.
Yeah, and I think that we see that a lot today. Although the people, like you say, have access to tools and things that make our lives so much more comfortable than 100 years ago, that we're seeing a lot of strife in a way. we're seeing a lot of people that, work hard and are contributing to society, but I don't feel like, and I don't think they feel like they're getting, what is due to them. And I'm hesitant to use that term because,
Right.
there's a lot of people, young people and maybe older people today too, that feel they're due a lot. And
Right.
I'm actually not invalidating that feeling. I would certainly push back against, the more socialist kind of leaning politicians today that are saying that they have a way to solve that problem. But um, if if you if you really look at the wealth inequality data, we're at kind of all-time highs. And I'm not somebody who says that there should be an equality of outcome. No, no, far from it. But what is undeniable is that it appears that it's kind of been tipped a little bit. And this is like what we keep talking about, where there's a fundamental issue, and so the band-aid solution in this case, right? Because I keep talking about, we're always trying to run around and put out the fire. The put out the fire is, well, let's really heavily tax all the wealth people and give some of it to the poorer people. And to be honest with you, that might be a solution that might be necessary. And this, you've seen this pendulum swing back and forth throughout history, and that the government says, oh, you know what, it's gotten a little too messed up. Let's try to, give some tax breaks to the poorer folks or something like that to try to get things back in line. But the underlying system, the fundamentals are why it's gotten like that in the
Right.
first place. And if you look in 1929, it was right about where it is now today, and that's when right after the Federal Reserve, the monetary history that I understand, it's a very, a too long didn't read, is very brief. It's since 1913 is established the Federal Reserve. And then just after that, in 1929, basically after they got enough time to have any effect on anything, the worst crash in modern financial history happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I attribute that directly. You were talking about the implications of what the WTF happened in 1971. I certainly do have conclusions I've drawn. I haven't made them on the website, but one of the ones that I've made is that right after you establish the central bank of the United States, well, you get one of the worst crashes in history, and you got a lot of government programs that come in and swoop in to defend and fix all the problems, right? And you should hear Colin talk about all the stuff they did in 1933, like burning food supplies to increase the price, so that farmers wouldn't go out of business and stuff. Just massively difficult to believe things that are real, that happened in history
Mm-hmm.
because of that. And I think in 1971, um, they they started targeting nominally 2% inflation, and that is, they're trying to keep essentially the prices of the CPI basket items the same, right? And what happens is that deflationary technology means that as we are getting better at producing things, the costs go down. This is very simple for people to understand. Anybody who's worked in any kind of business, is the whole goal is to do the same quality at a lower cost,
Mm-hmm.
or do this higher quality at the same cost, right? But they have been nominally targeting these 2% inflation numbers, and that those gains that society should be relishing in from the increased efficiencies, that's being robbed away from us. So the progress that we should have seen over the last 4 decades has been pulled out from under our feet. And I think that's very clear when you approach it this way. It doesn't, like, 2% inflation doesn't sound that bad, but it's also compounded annually every 2 years, or
Mm-hmm.
every year, and it's also this piece of the fact that it's nominally targeted. No matter how fast, no matter how quickly we get better at doing things, that's still going to be targeted in 2% nominally.
Mm-hmm.
That 2% number is kind of arbitrary because it doesn't take into effect how quickly we're getting better at stuff. And if you think about Moore's law and the way that technology is getting better, um, it's outpacing that inflation because it's so fast. But it's almost unknowable how much has been robbed away from our society, I think.
Right.
And
How much kind
that
of
makes me very sad.
yeah, how much productivity gains were not, realized or distributed, to society. I think is that kind of what
Right.
you're getting at?
Yes, and while at the same time, if you look at the wealth inequality numbers over time, in that same period of time, they've just skyrocketed. They've gone way up.
Right.
There was a
S-
period of stability in that. There was some kind of balance, and it seems that's been gone as well.
Right. And that value just accrues to the people closest to the spigot and, kind of screws
Yep,
everybody
they can.
further down the line. You said something interesting that I think is very relevant for the times today. And, you referenced kind of, despite the fact that, we have greater comforts and conveniences than ever before, obviously there's a lot of unrest. And, I think you used the example of young people kind of saying that they deserve more or they want more. And I
Hmm.
think I think there's because of the dynamic actually that you just described, that's, if we take that as being accurate, then their assertion would be true. Like they have been withheld in this case, let's say productivity and the gains to be derived from that. They've been those have been withheld from them. So in that case, they're correct. But also, it's like, how do you know? There's only one way to know what you deserve, right? And in a economic system that I think pervades the world over today, it's so perverse now that nobody can know like what they should be getting, what the distribution of wealth should be, what the income gap or the level of inequality, what it should be, because it's simply up to everybody's opinions and their wants and what they say they want and what they're worth. Because we've removed the market dynamics that allow the market to effectively value everybody as actors in it, i.e., we're not operating with a sound money, and we're operating with a large degree of state intervention. And those two things have just perverted the way that the market values everything that goes on in the market. Now, some things are affected more than others, of
Right.
course, but if we don't have those two things, then of course there's always going to be people thinking that they didn't get enough or that they deserve more. And there's going to be a good case for that, but they're never going to be able to know what exactly it is they deserve in when there's so many perversions inherent in the market.
Yeah, I think that's very well articulated, actually. This distortion of market prices. Um, the market is a beautiful thing where it's the aggregation of all of this data. That it's not a central computer that's aggregating this data. It's just the fact that I set my price here, and oh, that was too high, and now I lower it, and that won't, that action over and over and over again throughout,
Exactly.
the market of billions of interacting people all across the world. Are you familiar with the Milton Friedman and the pencil? It's actually not Milton Friedman's thing, but he talks about it, the
I
miracle of a pencil, and how
I've
and nobody
seen
knows how to make a pencil.
I've seen it, but please remind. I think saw him discuss it on a video, but go for it.
Yeah, it's beautiful because he says that nobody on Earth actually knows how to make a pencil because the wood is taken from the Northeast, and in order to get the wood down, you need a saw. Well, and in order to get a saw, you need to actually forge that saw, or you need to, refine the iron into steel, and then forge that saw. So, I mean, are you familiar with how to do that? Probably not. And then once you have the saw, then you can go cut down the tree. But then you have to transport it to the factory, and then you need rubber, right? And where do the rubber trees come from, and all the refining processes to get rubber down from the trees. And then there's the little metal band around the top, and that's refined from ore, and then molded into the band, and then attached, and then the graphite. And I love the way that he presents this. He's like, I don't even know where graphite comes from. So the fact that a pencil is made, and by the way, a pencil only costs 10 cents or whatever here in the
Right.
U.S. And it's
Right.
like the fact that we can make that for 10 cents with thousands of people collaborating all over the world is because of the price system in the first place. So
Right.
if the argument that you and I are making right now today is that prices are distorted, that it screws up that whole process.
Yeah.
And it's, to me, it's a miracle that we can still make the pencil despite all this. But the price of it is distorted, and I love this way that you're saying that the price of ourselves is now distorted. We don't know what we're worth, and we feel like we're worth more. And I think that's really interesting. You're saying that, like, if it's true what I say, then these young people feel like they deserve more. They've figured this out without looking at the website. They've figured out something doesn't feel right. I think one of the things that they don't feel right the fact that housing prices have gone crazy in this country, and I think the prospects for retirement are just are pretty much unfathomable for a large swath of United Statesians. I have a very U.S. centric view,
Yeah.
so I apologize. I actually allegedly it's the world super the easiest place to figure it out, and I've been working hard my whole life, and I don't even really think there's a way that I can retire as of right now, and I'm going to keep working for a very long time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that actually Robert Breedlove said on this as well is that um, because there's this institutionalized system of time theft that we have to work longer and longer and longer just to be able to do something like retire. And by the way, inflation hits fixed income people the hardest
Yeah.
because they're not constantly getting a new supply of higher, lower valued money at a higher um, nominal amount, right?
Right, which is
So that
usually
you have to, if you,
the lower income earners, which exacerbates the inequality that you were referencing earlier, right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
If you're saving for a 20, 30-year retirement, well, now you have to do a 2% compounded annual inflation calculation on that, and you have to find a way to preserve it. So you have to put it into the bond market and the stock market and all this stuff, just to preserve your wealth. You're not trying to take on risk. You're just trying to preserve the value that you've given to society, and that slowly evaporates over time
Yeah.
and gets handed to quintillion effect people, right?
Mm-hmm. And the kicker here, and look, I mean, I realize that this is a lot for any individual to take on. I mean, we're all on our individual journeys of how best to navigate this life, figure it out, have the best life we can, and enjoy the company of the people we love. That whole thing. But there there are things afoot much bigger than ourselves, and some people are gonna get, or seemingly a lot of people these days, a lot of young people are getting really wrapped up in I guess the context of their situation. And again, like I said before, I mean, partially I don't blame them, and then also partially I do. But we seem to be moving towards this thing where, the irony is that, in my opinion, what we need is, and I think most Bitcoiners would probably agree with this, is we need freer markets and sounder money. And we have most of the disenfranchised people around the world today looking for more government intervention and more reckless spending. And so even though it's back to your Band-Aid analogy, right? Like, it seems like it'll fix the problem, it'll ease some of the tension, but we're the momentum seems to be that people want to take the action that's going to make this issue worse.
Yes, and I think that's because of a lack of understanding of how to fix the fundamental issue, right?
Right.
Taking money from a bunch of rich people and give it to the poor people would probably temporarily solve some of the problems in the United States, but it wouldn't fix the underlying problem that made it happen, that caused it that way in the first place.
Right.
It's like a constantly trying to put out this fire that keeps starting, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And then, of course, then we have Bitcoin, right? And in a lot of the conversations I've had on this podcast and privately in my personal life, I mean, maybe I say this too much, but I think it's hard as a young person, especially, not to look out on the world and look there are elements of me that was always like motivated, excited, adventurous, optimistic. We all deal with these kind of like dualistic sort of sides within ourselves, and it is largely a matter of focus, which one you give energy to and engage in. But like I said a few seconds ago, like you can't entirely discount the context of the times in which you're in, the kind of larger structures that you're operating within. And I think for a lot of people, there was a very pervasive, very strongly felt hopelessness. And I get the sense that people that are coming to Bitcoin are recognizing, or whatever way they get into it, ultimately they gain a tremendous amount of hope because they realize what the problem was, as we were just articulating, and obviously much more, but to sum it up kind of that way. And then they begin to realize that this thing, Bitcoin, seems to be a hell of a good chance, or at the very least the best chance we have at countering that circumstance, that situation, a tool to well, basically to construct, a newer system that doesn't have those inherent faults. And our assumptions are, and we look at periods in the past to try to confirm this. And there's great debate about how all this plays out. Some are more optimistic and exuberant and hyperbolic than others. But we like to imagine how society would be and how our individual lives would be if we could establish a system based on a money and as a result markets on something like Bitcoin. And
Yeah.
that's I think providing a genuine hope to a lot of people. And so, I do this because I love having these conversations. That's how I got started. But I'm starting to kind of realize, like, it's probably going to be important for more people to be privy to these sorts of discussions. And I perhaps evangelize too often, and sometimes I got to rein myself in and not be the crazy, like, gung-ho Bitcoiner. But I think the more these conversations can get out there, the more the websites like the one you've done and the books that are written in the space and all the really cool activity actually that's really seemed to ramp up over the last 12 months can get out there. I mean, I think education is one of our best shots at getting this way of thinking into more people's heads.
Yeah. I think Bitcoin is kind of difficult to understand, but I think that's because that money is difficult to understand because we take it for granted in modern society and people don't really think about what it is. And you've probably discussed on your podcast before what money is, but I'd like to remind myself every once in a while that, and you alluded to this earlier, that it is a method for humans to organize, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it solves a very important problem in society. And I think even when you talk about it and you read the words, you don't quite really get it until you really ponder this a lot. But the fact that barter works so much that it works, but it's not a way to scale society on the level that we have taken society to, which is
Sure.
billions of people interacting to create pencils together, right? That the multi coincidence of wants, if you're trading your fish for chicken and the guy doesn't want your fish, you have to go find the guy that wants the fish and trade whatever he has for the guy that wants the chicken, and it gets very complicated. It sounds more like what we have with the different fiat currencies. Oh, you don't want my Japanese yen, you want US dollars, so I have to switch my Japanese yen to US dollars, and it's like this. It's this inefficiency that's introduced into the market, that having a one money, right? Because money's in specific societies at least converge on one money, and even if you look globally, before it was the U.S. dollar, it was the Great British Pound.
Mm.
That the market, even though there are all these different government currencies, that the Great British Pound was the one lingua franca. It was the one common method of exchange, and now the same you see with the U.S. dollar. That that this network effect of money is very important, and it is money itself that allows our society to scale. And when you learn about the history of money and what made some good monies and what made some bad monies, it gets you thinking about what is the type of qualities that would be good in a money. And I think that whole conversation has to happen, and you need to do a little bit of research on the history of different types of monies and what made good ones and what made bad ones, in order to even start looking at Bitcoin and say whether or not it's a good money or a bad money.
Mm-hmm.
And Saifedean's book is good about this. Nick Nick Szavo's Shelling Out is really good to give you an idea of different cultures and different monies that they use. And today, I've heard Bitcoiners. I think it was a Murad originally that said gold or Bitcoin is a 10x improvement on gold. And I've recently been saying that it's probably more than 10x.
Right.
But what's really interesting right now is that I think we are still in the early days. This technology is new on a cosmic scale. On a cosmic scale or on a monetary scale. I think the U.S. dollar is kind of leaving its way from the global reserve currency. But that the process of that actually happening might take a decade or two, and that's how these things happen. It's one of those. It's very difficult to see when you're inside it,
Yeah.
right? It's one in retrospect. Oh, like you can see when the Great British Pound flipped to the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the U.S. dollar is on its way out, and I've been doing a lot of macro trying to understand the macro situation in the world. And one of the things that I think the world really needs is a verifiable um, asset that nobody has control over the creation of. Because if you look at this euro dollar system, that essentially it's this way that banks outside of the U.S. need to create U.S. dollars so that this reserve exchange can happen, because
Right.
they need the U.S. dollars, right? Because of the network effect of those U.S. dollars. That that Bitcoin is very well suited to this, the fact that they need this verifiable thing that nobody can screw up, because it seems like there's a lot of inflation in US dollars in the euro dollar system. It means that the US government isn't even doing that. It's just this crazy system of how these banks like create money. And uh, I do think Bitcoin is suited for that, but that it's not ready on the scale of time that we're at right now. That
Sure.
it's still being developed. And I think one of the hardest things, you were talking about, I try not to be over bullish and over, hyperbolic about it. I do too. I try to be fairly realistic. And I think one of the biggest issues today, and I think a lot of people agree, and maybe some people don't, is this idea of custody. And I look at some of the smartest people in the space, and one guy's saying, "Oh, all you need to do is buy two laptops, and completely offline, and then create all these seeds, and then destroy both of those laptops, and then and it is $1,000, $2,000 later. Sure, that's great if you're a Bitcoin whale. That is Glacier protocol and all that stuff. That's probably what you should be doing. But for an average guy who's just trying to get into the space and start DCAing a few $20 a week or whatever, that stuff sounds insane to them. And I think that's not quite a solved problem yet, and it's not necessarily something that's just going to be a magic wand waving, because we're used to this kind of nanny economy where these corporations take care of us. If we lose our password or something like that, then we just call them up and they're like, "Oh, no problem, I got you." And this is a different paradigm. I think there's a big paradigm shift in bearer assets. So I do think we're a ways away from it, but I think that I think there's tools that are being developed, and different methods. And for one of these things I saw, vaults. I don't know if you're familiar with this. It's this idea that you can kind of spend to this address that, if the funds get taken out of it, you can like unspend them, kind of, within a certain period of time. Little things like that, and little ways to make this process easier
Yeah.
is slowly happening, but I don't think it's there yet. And I don't think people certainly have wrapped their head around the idea that, developing one of these protocols for how you're going to store your own coins requires, like, it's kind of an individual process. Everybody has different trade-offs that they're willing to make, and everybody's a different kind of threat model that they need to take on. And we don't do that as a society right today. We just stick it in the bank and call it a day.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's the nanny mentality, and so what we're up against here is not just like, good UI and well marketed or publicized or distributed, solutions for the mainstream. I think a lot of people that are into Bitcoin. I mean, I haven't met a Bitcoiner that hasn't claimed that their behavior has changed at least some degree since they've gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Most of them talk about a lower time preference. Most of them talk about more personal responsibility. Most of them talk about being more aware of privacy and security and that kind of stuff. And so what that represents is, a pretty dramatic shift in perspective. And so I agree with you totally that it's not just like, oh, the right product hasn't come out yet. It's like, no, part of this whole thing is that we're asking people to make a pretty fundamental change, and that's to start taking responsibility for the things in their life that's most important to them. And we're starting with really the thing that's most important to them, which is their money. People might claim there's other things most important, but I think majority of the time behavior would suggest people, their money is the thing that's most important to them. And we're asking them to have a total shift of mindset from going from one way of operating, which is, someone stronger, bigger, safer will take care of my money, and if anything happens to it, I have whatever recourse I have, and that's peace of mind enough. Versus taking all that responsibility on yourself, and like I'm sure you would agree, like it's a bit scary, like when you start having a decent portion of your savings in this stuff, and you realize that like it is all dependent on you to whatever protocol that you adhere to, it's on you. And if you fuck up, it's like gone in a flash. There's no like, who do I call now? Or I need to send an email or whatever. It's like, no, you like in the very second you made that mistake, you realize that it's gone. And that's the kind of dynamic that you're dealing with. So,
Yeah.
it does make me a little bit more sympathetic to, the bridge that needs to be crossed for people to come to the Bitcoin side of things, because it's not just like learning about a history about money and learning about the importance or the innovation of this technology. It's a change in worldview, and our worldview as a society, or many people, from my perspective at least, this is just my opinion, but so many things have been outsourced. And yes, this is probably because of the type of money and the type of state and governance we've had for the last 100 years. But whether it's healthcare, or whether it's money, or whether it's you could almost pick anything. People outsource the responsibility of managing it to someone that they think is either more competent at it, or it's a safer, more secure option, or whatever. But we've been trained or conditioned to for all the most important things in our life to kind of let somebody else, if not take care of it for us, dictate how we should go about doing it, rather than educating ourselves and taking the responsibility upon ourselves to manage it for and by ourselves. And so that kind of a change, that's a tricky thing to get on a large scale. I think it's happening, but it's tricky.
Well, it goes back to the education piece, right? Because and you said that already, but that's such a huge part of it. Because let's say, let's say we have gold as our money right now, and today I come along and I say, what if I develop this system and I call it the Federal Reserve, where the banks can't now have a bank run anymore? They never run out of money. It sounds like a great thing, but what if the result of that is that it destroys society, and it puts people in massive amounts of debt, and countries in massive amounts of debt, and corporations in massive amount of debt, and through inflation it robs away your ability to save for the future at all. That's bad. And while the thing sounded good in the first place, so I'm trying to look at the other side of it. But if you bring it back to what we're talking about, essentially, that if individual sovereignty is more viable today than it ever has been, and we'd like to seize that opportunity. It's not a new product that comes out on the shelf that you go and buy. Right. It's something that we do have to actually actively seize and take control of, and that is a little bit harder pill for people to swallow, because they're used to just going down to the store and getting product X, and that's what's going to improve your life.
Yeah.
If this truly will improve our life, if we're right about some of these concepts, it's going to require a lot of work on people's part. Yeah. And some of this is just time, right? Sure. This idea of LIMBY, and some of it's education, and sometimes education takes time to distill through society. Luckily, we have the internet. It's the best way to share information that the human race has ever had, by orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
So there's certainly hope for that to happen, but it is just something that just needs to coalesce in society, and I think what you're doing with your pod is a huge part of that. I think it's a slow march that we all have to. And the other thing I like is, and the reason I started like talking to people, and I was really appreciative that Heavily Armed Clown had me on his Bitcoin Echo Chamber podcast, because I had just reached out to him after one of his pods, and he just said, hey, at the end of the pod, he just said, hey, just reach out to me if you want to have a chat sometime. And he did. And I've been on a few other podcasts too, but like, I'm not a developer. I don't work at a Bitcoin company. I just write about and talk about Bitcoin, and it's the conversation that we're having. And I think largely, yes, there is some settled stuff. If you talk to Nick Szabo, he's probably like been waiting for the last 10 years for people to catch up. And, I think there's some stuff that is pretty well understood, but I think as a paradigm, as Bitcoin emerging on the market, and possibly becoming the one global money, that has a lot of implications that I think we're still kind of trying to figure out. Even the smartest people in the space that have been doing this for years are still kind of figuring new things out every day that are new implications of this technology simply existing. So I just wanted to be part of that conversation, and I appreciate you letting me do that with you because you
Well,
seem like a really bright guy.
well, man, I appreciate, the work you've done and you joining me on this. I love these conversations. And, that gets at the point of what we're doing is that we no matter how long you've been involved in this, you mentioned Zabo, or what your level of expertise is. I mean, and again, like I'm maybe I exaggerate sometimes, but to me it seems like we're just in the process now of all these people coming into the space from a different perspective, from a different angle, from a different background, honing in on a different aspect, and then kind of weaving together a narrative and then throwing it up in the space, whether that's on Twitter, whether that's on podcasts, whether that's in a direct conversation with somebody else. We're just narrative smashing right now, and we're seeing like
Hmm.
which one's kind of like throwing spaghetti at the wall, which one kind of sticks and seems legit, like I had Brandon
Like
Quittem
cheap
on.
payments, for example. Remember cheap
But yeah,
payments?
exactly,
That was
exactly.
2014. It turns out that didn't stick.
Right. And I don't know if it's the tech driving the narrative or the narrative driving the tech, or, maybe it's a bit of both, and it's really hard to determine which it is. That's actually, a case in point, what you just brought up. But, another one that I thought was interesting, I had Brandon Quittem on the other day, and, making the analogy to mycelium. And it just causes people to go like, huh, that's interesting. And then, then your mind just goes in a million different directions. And I feel like that's the process that we're in right now. We're just trying to be like this kind of alien thing has emerged that we all feel, is important, but we don't know exactly why. And we're as we go along, we're gaining, we're trying to gain the sufficient like source material, like the stuff that you put on your site to kind of give us some indication or some confidence, or help us explain why we're getting the feeling that it's important. But it's still, like you said, it's still only, we're kind of working backwards rather than really having any ability to have much foresight with this, beyond, what the tech will look like in a year or two. But yeah, we don't know what this is. And I think that's the process of, that's what we're doing here. But another thing that came to my mind when you were speaking just a second ago is, I think, back to the kind of worldview change that may be required for people to see this and really want to engage with it. I was just thinking the other day, like, I feel like there's one of the sentiments or attitudes that maybe pervades our times is, I feel like there's a real profound uncertainty that a lot of people feel. And as a result, I'm uncertain about how to manage my money, so I'm going to get somebody else to do it. I'm uncertain about how to manage my health, so I'm going to get somebody else to do it. I'm uncertain about the best way to eat, so I'm going to buy the 10 top selling diet books at the bookstore. I'm uncertain about, and we always look outside for answers. And I don't want to be like too new agey, like all the answers are inside of you sort of thing, but I do think we will, I think one, there are probably more answers inside of us than that we generally think are there, and that we, as a result, search for. But I do like, the kind of the mirror that is Bitcoin. That's either, showing the mirror or shining the flashlight back on us, and the kind of implied statement that it's making is like, if you want the most from me, you're gonna, like, it's your responsibility to see it and grab it. Like, it's not going to do it for you. It's not going to try to sell you. It's not like a multi-level marketer calling you up, and it's not like your bank offering you, rewards points or whatever. It's like, I'm here, but if you're going to be able to maximize the benefit to be derived from me, you're going to need to change. And I think that's great, but like you said, I think it's the information, the way that information flows today will certainly accelerate it compared to, maybe similar technological revolutions of the past. But, certain things can't be rushed, and that may be one of them.
Yeah, I often, maybe this is a tangent, but I always think about this. What what did I look at? How did I view Bitcoin before I went down the rabbit hole? And it seems like it would be something easy to remember, but for some reason it's very fleeting for me. I recall vividly learning about it on Slashdot very early on. And I recall, like, in the years from then until 2017, seeing it on TV and being like, oh, yeah, look, the criminals use it or whatever. And I had this idea of it, but it's very difficult for me now because I view it as an alien life that, Gigi and Brandon are describing.
Right.
And I view it as a technological revolution. I view it as a path to prosperity for the whole world, right? All these places that, talking about um, that that aren't doing as well as places like the U.S. I feel like it's more of a flat system that is going to propel society as a method of scaling, as a method of allowing humans to organize on scales unfathomable and without central organization. That it's back to that price system thing where it's all of these individuals acting together um, for mutually beneficial exchange, right? That it will massively propel us forward. But it's so hard for me to remember what I thought of it before, and I often think about that because I just saw Stop and Decrypt. He posted something on Twitter, and he was like, "Have you been talking to no coiners about Bitcoin, and how did it go?" And I do that every once in a while, and more lately, instead of just trying to be like, "Hey, let me convince you about Bitcoin. Do you have like 2 hours to listen to Austrian economics and monetary theory and monetary history?" Instead, I just try to ask them and probe them. Instead of being like, "Hey, do you want to hear about this?" I'm like, "Well, what do you think about it? What is it? What is it to you?"
Mhm.
And I get interesting answers that are not as negative as you'd think. I think a lot of people are curious about it, but I think it's taking us time, and I think it's taking us developing tools and resources for people to onboard more quickly. And I think it's undeniable that if you were trying to onboard in 2013 versus today, that there's a lot more ways to understand this thing that are much more succinct and much more approachable.
Yeah,
And I think that will only continue
I
and get
agree.
better.
I agree. And I think that's the right approach. Just probing people. I mean, I asked someone the other day, just, why do you think gold has value? We were just having a conversation, and they know I'm a Bitcoiner. So I was like, I got a question for you. Why do you think the whole world, why do we wear gold jewelry? Why does gold have value? And that's an interesting conversation to have. Nothing to do with Bitcoin, but
Mhm.
most people kind of scratch their head and they're like, I don't know. Like, I guess because we've always liked gold, right? And it's like, well, yeah, but it's not written in our DNA. There's got to be a reason, right? So I agree. But you know what I realized the other day? I was having a podcast with a friend of mine from high school who recently launched his writing career, and he wanted me to come on and have a chat with him on his podcast. And we were talking about psychedelics most of the time,
Mhm.
which was it's a area of keen interest for me also. But at the end, he was like, "Tell me about Bitcoin." And one, I was a bit caught off guard, and two, it made me realize as much as I have these conversations on the podcast, like it's one thing to have a conversation with another Bitcoiner, right? Because you're just it's like you're playing ping pong. Like you both like you're speaking the same language, just back and forth and
Right.
back and forth. But when I had to try to explain it, from basically to a no coiner,
Or pre-coin.
pre-coiner, sorry. I realized how fucking terrible I was at it. I listened. I after I finished, I was like, dude, I'm sorry. That was not a very good articulation of the case for Bitcoin. And so that's another thing. Like I'm always wondering, like, well, how come more people aren't into this? It's like, well, how many people do you think get exposed to like a really good case for it? Because what am I trying to say? Like, I wouldn't say
Well,
I'm.
Bitcoin is like psychedelics, right? Where there's a specific subset of the population that is interested in these things, and because it's a small percentage of the society, that there's not an established cultural and global narrative around these things. Some people view psychedelics as the devil,
Right.
and some people view them as a tool to learn more about yourself. And like any tool, they have some downsides too. Like, if you take too much in the wrong mindset, it might be a difficult time for you.
Yeah.
I think Bitcoin is similar to that, where to you, you understand this thing so well now, and you've read all the source material that you realize that when you try to talk about it, you're referencing the narrative and these fundamental concepts that we, as you and I are talking about it, it's easy for us to quickly reference, like jargon, right?
Yes.
The term of jargon is like
Yes.
being able to distill complex topics into a single, syllable word, maybe, so that I can string multiple ones together, and I can, in one quick sentence, explain Bitcoin to you. But to explain it to a pre-coiner, it requires referencing all these things, and because those aren't, well understood among that larger part of our culture, it becomes more difficult because you're like, oh, hold on, I have to go back and explain what 1971, what the relevance of that is, and then I have to go back and explain, the medium of exchange and the store of value and all these different things, and you end up tripping over yourself, I think.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you. That's what I was trying to
Yeah.
articulate a second ago. That's exactly what I was trying to say. But yeah, you're right. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't know where to anchor in the case you're about to make. Like, you don't know where to start on that. Like, do I just go right down to like start at what is money and all the way up? Because that's going to be a bit of a mind bending and long conversation.
Well, let
So
me
yeah,
interrupt
go
you
ahead.
for a second, because Brandon Quittem himself, I was DMing him with him the other day, and he was talking about, oh, I have this idea, and we were back and forth a little bit, and he referenced me in one of the tweets, but it was a whole thread about, what we should do as Bitcoiners right now is write a guide to Bitcoin for different, because we have different,
Yeah,
even within our major culture, we have different minor cultures like
we
millennials and
discussed that on the
CS broads,
podcast.
and
Yeah.
yeah, you did, and
Yeah.
and so like that's what has yet to be written is the millennials guide to Bitcoin, and the environmentalist guide to Bitcoin, and the vegans guide to Bitcoin, because we've scared them all off with their carnivores. uh, let's accept everybody, and let's show them all different ways to understand this thing, and I just love that thread, and I'm planning on trying to tackle one or two of those at some point, or maybe even do like an overview, just like write an entire thing and say, here are all the criticisms of Bitcoin, here are all the answers, or here are all the different perspectives you could look at it from. And I think that there a lot of that information's out there, it just isn't organized that way right now.
Yeah, totally. I love that because you're right. A lot of the information is just kind of, more or less objective, like this is what it is. But if the assertion earlier was right that this is more than a adoption of tech, it's a change in worldview, then you've got to kind of communicate on the plane of that individual's worldview, which is predicated very much on other, characteristics of their personality, like, their diet or their demographic or their religion or whatever, like Bitcoin for Jews. I don't know, like
Yeah, and there's a guy that does that, by the way, the
right,
Bitcoin
right,
rabbi,
Bitcoin rabbi.
right? And
Yeah.
for me, it's it's tough because I say this, but I believe in order to really understand Bitcoin, you need to dig into the Austrian economics, because that was when I went from being like an Andreas Antonopoulos kind of guy, like, oh, this is, be your own bank and borderless payments, and that's the future. When I dove into Austrian economics, and I still have a lot to read and I still have a lot to learn. It was a fundamental shift for me, that now it's like, oh, I understand how this inserts itself into markets, and what the implications of that are, I think, in a much better way. So I really recommend, if folks are listening to this and they feel like they get that there's something about Bitcoin, but they don't quite, fully integrate why it's so important from an economic perspective, really dig into the Rothbard and the Hayek and the Mises and the Henry Hazlitt's, and it's so worth it. It's an investment of time, and some of these books are very long, but they're also illuminating about how the world works. I think, and they illuminate so many of the misconceptions about how we think the world works based on our current paradigms.
Yeah. I agree with that, but kind of an unpopular opinion, I guess, that I've been mulling over lately is just if we rewind 30 seconds to what we were saying, like there's some people, they're never ever ever gonna read Hayek. Like, I'm thinking about them right
Oh
now.
yeah,
I won't name names because I don't want to be a dick, but it's just not gonna
sure.
happen. They're not on that level, but I don't think that excludes them from seeing the value in Bitcoin, because like we were saying, 10 minutes
Right.
ago, Bitcoin, we don't even know what it is. It's seeming like it's a lot of different things, and we're smashing together these narratives right now. But it's certainly, I mean, obviously the Austrian sort of, if you're on that frequency, then it resonates. But certainly, maybe another frequency based on another narrative resonates with another demographic or another type of individual. So I know there's lots made of the Austrian thing with Bitcoin, and I think it's valid and it's interesting, and it's certainly, if you're that way inclined to read that type of material and you have the curiosity and then it's like maybe it's a fast track, maybe it's a shortcut to like really getting some of the major components of it. But I don't think it's necessary. I think you could see the value in Bitcoin absent, having read Austrian economics.
That's very true. And value is subjective, by the way. And by the way, the users of Bitcoin today are users that have very different perspectives and very different uses for it. Like some people literally do use it for cross-border payments,
Right.
and that may not be fundamentally revolutionary for society, but some people in Venezuela use it to store their value as I mean, instead of a U.S. dollar where they have to go down to a guy on the street to buy it, they use it because they can online. It's very difficult to stop them from acquiring some and using it as a way to store their value. And people in more developed countries are maybe using it as a savings technology, as Pierre Richard says. So even today, the people that don't, people in Venezuela might not necessarily be reading all these Austrian economics texts. They're still using it, and they see a value proposition, a subjective value proposition,
Mm-hmm.
and in helping people understand that there are these different value propositions, and how to understand how it might help them is a complex task, but I think we're working on
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's actually kind of fun because, if you can align with something that you believe so strongly in the potential of, obviously there's no future is certain, but if you believe it has the potential to assume kind of the role that we've been discussing here, then it's real easy to, it makes it a lot easier to try to dig within yourself to kind of figure out, like, in what manner do you communicate? Like, where do you, on what kind of people do you resonate the most with, and what style of communication are you most effective at kind of breaking through to? And then, you know, tweaking that a little bit so that you're maybe reaching a broader audience, or you're tweaking the message, you mentioned Andreas, and, I think
it.
most of us, were influenced by him, in the early days, and maybe even still. And, I think he gets
No, we
a,
hate him now, John.
I
We hate
know,
him
I
now.
know, I know. I think, for most people, regardless of, any minor infractions these days, or maybe major, depending on your position, but he probably gets a pass for just being an early torchbearer and bringing so many people into the space. But, one of the things that I kind of envy about him is that because he's been, speaking publicly about this for so long, and obviously, he believed in it. He's a huge advocate. I envy the kind of the process of him throwing himself out there in front of people, talking about this completely foreign, alien thing, and
Yeah.
learning himself how to interact with the people he's speaking with, how to change or tweak his style of delivery, how he speaks, tone, words, blah blah blah, to try to get this through to more people. I think that's a really cool thing that we're probably all dealing with in our own little way, especially, content creators in the space. And he's just the biggest exemplar of that. But it's fun, man. I mean, I've spoken about this with a lot of the hardcore Bitcoiners recently. You mentioned Gigi, him being definitely among them. But it's when you find that thing that you can, like, you feel is worthy of your energy and your attention and your commitment and your dedication and your hard work. It makes it so much easier, so much more fun, because prior to that, if you're working some, job that you don't like, even if it even pays you well, but you're still just like, like, what am I, sure, I'm getting a paycheck, but I don't believe in this thing. I don't really enjoy this. I don't really see I can't see down the road and think, wow, there's something really great going to come from this. And I think if we go way back to the earlier part of the conversation, talking about hope and that sort of thing, I think, having something like this that, people see hope in and see that it's worth their contribution. And now, everyone's just kind of figuring out what their contribution is going to be. And I think that's pretty awesome.
And I just, you said a lot of stuff there, but just very briefly, uh, if you have a criticism of Andreas, that's totally fine. I'm more like you. I have a lot of respect for what he has done for the space, and I don't think people. I try not to idolize people. You know, if you pick some of these really hardcore Bitcoiners, they might say a thing or two that I don't necessarily disagree with, and it's going to take a lot more for me to unfollow them completely and outcast them for society.
Mm-hmm.
And how we do that is important too. People like Roger Ver, it's difficult for us to say that he's helping the space at this point. And maybe he did do some help for it at some point. So that's obviously that's a line you have to draw. But I think that humans are fallible, and that this thing is difficult to understand.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different ways to understand it, and that's okay. That we follow people on Twitter, right? We don't follow centralized organizations of how information comes down. We follow different people, and people need to assimilate information for themselves and draw their own conclusions and not idolize people and put them on a pedestal. And I have no problem listening to Andreas Antonopoulos if 1 out of 10 things he says is not something I agree with.
Right.
That's totally fine with me.
Right.
And so I'm with you on that for sure.
Yeah. And so, I mean, if we bring it back down to more relevant actors, I mean, beside the website, I mean, is this something are you working in the space full time, or is this just kind of extracurricular for you, or?
It's very extracurricular for me. I'd love to break more into the space, and I've been trying to get writing. I want to write a little bit more long form. Yeah, I do some Twitter threads here and there. I did a big one about inflation. So if you go to my profile, you can see a bunch of that stuff just pinned right to the top. There is a whole meta thread of all the different threads if you want to see some of my writings there. But I've been trying to write more long form, and recently it's been difficult because I see a lot of these amazing writers like Gigi, Parker Lewis is just absolutely destroying right now. All the Unchained guys. James O'Byrne had an incredible piece recently that they're talking about some of the same ideas I wanted to write about, but they all articulated them far better than I could have. So I'm a little bit taken aback and trying to find a way. So I think I'm going to go head over to Brandon Quittam's thread and try to find one of the simpler ways to kind of approach this, and I think that might be a good thing. But I'm not sure. I guess my answer is I'm not sure what I'm doing for the space right now. I'm just still having a conversation a little bit right now.
Yeah. Well, look, man. I mean, obviously, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but based on the conversation that we just had, it's like, and don't get me wrong, I get it, man. I mean, there's a fucking million podcasters out there, right? So why would I think that anybody would give a fuck that anything I have to say? And fair play if they don't. I mean, I'm not here to convince anybody, but one of the things that gives me solace, I guess, is despite all the great people doing stuff, I know that there's, even if only small, variances in our perspective. And the variances in our perspective is the difference between us communicating with one person and not communicating with another. So, Nick Carter might communicate with, 10,000 people that think like Nick, or that, that resonate with the way he speaks and the examples he uses and the narrative that he weaves. But there's probably another group of people that would respond more positively to, someone making the same sort of case, but saying it in a bit of a different way and coming at it from a bit of a different perspective. So, again, I hate to give unsolicited advice, but I would just say, fucking do it. If it feels like you got something to say, throw it down on paper and put it out there. And I wouldn't be too concerned with, the other people and how you think you stack up to them, because that's not for you to determine. That's for the market to determine, actually. So,
I'm trying. I think Twitter is a great medium because it's not so. It doesn't have to be like perfect, so to speak. It doesn't have to be this perfectly formatted and all this. You can be a little bit more fluid in getting ideas out there, and I think I'm still trying to understand what this decentralized fungal network slash money system is, and I think the conversations I have with people like you make it easier for me to understand it. So I'll keep writing, and I'll keep thinking, and I'll keep having conversation. reach out to me anytime if you want to have a chat.
Well, I'm sure I'll take you up on that. But did I notice you seem to head nod and agree when I brought up the psychedelic thing? Am I speaking with a fellow psychonaut here?
I've taken a psychonautical trip before,
Okay.
for sure, and I don't have as I think clear articulations as you and Brandon did but I really enjoyed your discussion of it.
Thanks, man.
I what I really liked about the way you guys talked about it is, and I think I was talking to Brandon about it, and he had a slightly different perspective, but that you said that there's these rituals surrounding it, and I'm probably more in between the two of you. Where, see, I view psychedelics as a tool, just like
Hmm.
I view Bitcoin as a tool, and I think that it's very simple to understand that tools can be good and bad, right? That tools have positives and negatives. There's
Totally.
this idea of the double-edged sword, right? That a sword is a very powerful tool that has been used for both good and evil, and that psychedelics are something to be respected, and it's not something that I do a
100%.
lot.
100%.
Yeah, I don't do a lot of them today, but I did when I was younger, and I was doing them. It's funny because I was doing them more recreationally, but I did a lot of learning about them before I started using them. And the one thing that I got from them that was very clear is that they should be respected as being powerful things. And whether or not you want to call them a tool is fine. And if you want to use them for recreation, that's fine too. But I think you would be a little bit more farther on the spectrum of, maybe try to understand why there's some of these rituals about it, and why they're so well respected, and that they do have powerful effects. And if you're going to take one of these journeys, that you might it might behoove yourself to kind of prepare yourself for that journey, just as you do any other journey
Right.
or experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And the reason why I asked, actually, I wasn't trying to out you or anything like that, but
No,
I
no.
was just thinking, one, I can't help but make the comparison about something that's so, has the potential, as you say, has potential, can be bad or good, but has such potential upside that is kind of still under the radar in many cases. And
Yeah,
I compare Bitcoin and psychedelics. I put them in a similar category in that regard. But I was actually thinking about it in terms of the communication piece. Like that's another demo of people that engage in a certain behavior or activities because they see value in it and they know they have to be responsible with it and they have to be prepared and stuff like that. And so I didn't mean to, didn't mean to break into a big thing about it. But just to say that, I think there's so much room for more and more and more perspectives on how to approach and engage this thing. That like, if anybody ever comes up to me, it's like, I love Bitcoin. I'm thinking about, I don't know, writing about it or podcast. I'm just like, do it now. Like, start now. Like, don't even think about it. Like, write something down in the next 30 minutes and publish it. Like, because, and also that's the only way to know, how you feel about something when you put it out there. And, there's something
yeah,
that feels, if you put out a piece of expression, let's say, in the digital realm, so an article, a tweet, a podcast, a video, you put it out and you can tell that like it wasn't really a genuine expression. Like maybe you were trying a bit too hard to sound a certain way, be a certain way. That's going to feel so icky that you're going to be like, oh fuck, next time I gotta try something different because that wasn't it. And so I think that's the big benefit of, I used to do a lot of writing by myself, just in not diary, I'd write on my computer and just keep it for my own archives and stuff, and haven't really published much of it. But with these interviews that I've done on YouTube and in the podcast, part of them, because I'd be just as happy to have them and keep them for my own personal archives. But part of the reason I put them out there is because there is a pretty substantial personal development piece when you start expressing yourself in a public forum. Because, unless I just think it kind of forces you to really, over time, as you do it, get better at understanding like what expression really is your genuine expression. And then you put it out into the mirror of the public, let's say, and yes, you get feedback, but more importantly, you're able to kind of look at it outside of yourself and say like, oh, that ain't me. Like, why did I say that, or why did I do that? And the process of that, back and forth, I think is like hugely beneficial. And you can't rush it, and you can't have too many. If you have a big goal attached to that, that may kind of pervert that process. So I think to do it in its purest form, you do it because it's something that you love, and you express that aspect of yourself through that, and then you see what happens. So I see that happening a lot in this space now, which is one of the encouraging aspects about it. You get all these people that are just confronting this thing, you know, genuinely and sincerely, and that's such a breath of fresh air, man. Like I've been in various work capacities before, and you meet people that are fake, and you meet people that are driven by you know too much greed, and you meet people that are corrupt, and you meet all sorts of people, and it's really really refreshing and nice to now, obviously, I'm generalizing, but in general, I think, it's an industry that, there's a lot of people that feel, I guess, free to be themselves, and they're being sincere, and they're approaching this with, in a genuine way, and I think that's one of the things that draws me to it too, and probably others as well. Just people, and that people might interpret that as toxicity sometimes too, because part of being genuine is being ruthlessly honest, and there's certainly an abundance of that, especially if you want to fuck around on Bitcoin Twitter, but you know,
Mhm.
there's something beautiful about that too.
Yeah, and I like Twitter, like I said, because it's a little bit more informal. And when I write something on Twitter, I fully expect 30 people to come by and tell me why I'm wrong. And 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 then I like when that happens, because I can either find out that I might have been wrong in some way, or I can maybe reinforce my own ideas. And if you watch somebody like, you're talking about being genuine, somebody like Pierre Richard, when he deletes his tweets, he'll screenshot it first, and then he'll delete it, and then he'll post with the screenshot and say, I've kind of changed my position on this thing, and this is why, and he'll explain it. And that's real honesty, and
Yeah.
that's real growth. And I think that also demonstrates, if somebody like Pierre Richard is willing to, do something like that, that he's being honest, but also that we are still kind of trying to learn about this thing, and all of these different implications too. And it's funny, because you were talking about writing something and then kind of taking a step back and not being sure it's what you believe. And I had actually written a blog when I first started getting into this, and I wrote 10 or 11 posts on it. And I think there's some good stuff in there, but there's some stuff in there that I wouldn't necessarily say today. Like, there's some, I mentioned a shitcoin here or there, which I would maybe update or amend in some way. I think that my understanding is better now, but it's funny, if I went back and wrote that, I feel like I'm having writer's block. Before, I was just typing, and I think the reason I was doing it is for that reason that you were saying, is that in order to organize and get your own thoughts
Yeah, yeah,
powerful, to try
yeah,
to understand something.
yeah. It's I'm on this kick, or have been for the last maybe 2 or 3 years, and this is probably why I've started creating content. But and I have no good way of articulating this right now, but I just like the thing that keeps repeating in my head is like it's expression is important. Like it's important to, and I've never been like an expressive person, like not artistically, not musically. Sports have been my thing for most of my life, and that's it. So like, there's not much of a creative bone in my body, but there's obviously other ways of expressing yourself, and I really should probably write about this topic in particular, because it does fascinate me tremendously. But anyways, the mantra that I just kind of keep hearing in the back of my mind is that like expression and genuine expression is good, and it implies that you have to continue digging to understand yourself more, so that you can transmute that understanding into an expression. So it's kind of, not only is it the expression for the sake of it, but it's because it implies that kind of that never-ending process of trying to understand yourself more.
I love that. That's awesome, man.
Um, well, Ben, I we've been chatting for like hour and 25 minutes now. I don't usually I do the rapid fire portion here, but I think I might be cutting into your morning now. What do you like on time?
If you want to do it real quick, I have time.
Okay, cool. I'll just hit into it, and you can however long you want to answer. Up to you. So, first one is, what is money?
uh, a method for people to organize and exchange and Wow, that was harder than I thought it would be.
That's what we're
It
talking
solves the
about, right?
multi-coincidence of wants.
Right, right. If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother, or somebody over 80, what would you say?
That it's a digital commodity that lives on the internet, that cannot be debased, and that you hold yourself and you can transfer without a third party like a bank.
What is the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
Um, because I think it is the government control of money that is a root cause of a lot of the issues that we have in society. And I think a system that we agree on, it's a fair system, will be much better for the future of humankind.
What does the sovereign individual mean to you?
I have not read the book, but what I understand it as is that it is claiming, sovereignty, which is that's a recursive definition. So it is the asserting some kind of control and freedom over one's self rather than relying on a nation state to provide that for you.
How long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more about it and purchase it, if you're comfortable saying?
It took me over 5 years, multiple touches in over 5 years.
What has been the most effective method of educating people about Bitcoin in conversation or more formally?
I think understanding where they're coming from and asking them questions and letting the conversation flow naturally is one of the most effective methods because everybody approaches it a little bit differently.
What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
Pink Floyd, Money.
Favorite movie clip or rant of all time?
Oh, I really like in the movie Dogma when the angel comes down and says, uh, beliefs are tricky because it's hard to change a belief, but an idea, that's a really powerful thing.
Hmm. Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
I think Bitcoin cannot be stopped because it's more of an idea than one technology, and that if there was a critical bug, for example, it would they would patch the bug eventually, and we could find a UTXO state that was close enough and move forward. And if you know parts of it was attacked, I think the mycelial network will reemerge somewhere else. So I don't think it's possible to kill the idea of it. So as long as people want to use it, it will always be around somehow.
What was your most recent aha or level up in understanding of Bitcoin, if any?
Um, Probably reading James O'Byrne's Pierce, Bitcoin is for Safety.
Is that an article or a book?
Yeah, article.
Article.
Bitcoin is for Safety by James O'Byrne.
I'll have to check it out. What did you think will be Bitcoin? What do you think Bitcoin will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on society?
uh, I think people having the ability to store their value very is poorly understood, and how much of that has an effect on people's futures and their time preferences and such.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's anonymous creator, and the coins that he likely controls?
I had a lot of trouble with this first, and I know that you can't steal from people, but I do think that they're gone. I think that they're lost, but I'm not sure. And I'm not gonna lie to you, it's a little weird to me that 10% of the supply might possibly come back onto the market at some point.
Yeah.
But not that it's not necessarily the end of Bitcoin, because that money might be used for good.
Hmm.
So I don't know.
What have you learned about yourself, or how have you changed, if at all, as a result of learning about and interacting with Bitcoin?
What have I learned about myself? I have learned that I've always wanted to help people, and that I think that this technology will help people across the world more than anything else. And I think that it's the most important thing, that I want to help people understand that, and that that's not as easy as I would like it to be.
Mm. What is your most controversial or contrarian view on or opinion rather? If none on Bitcoin, any subject is okay.
um, that I think Bitcoinization will happen a little bit more slowly than we think, and that it may never be hyper Bitcoinization in the way that fiat money disappears or whatever. But it might I know it might just kind of continue along as a parallel economy. And I don't know this, but that it's a possibility.
Ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
5 years, probably 200K.
Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
Um, Cook up some meat and drink some coffee and read about Bitcoin.
That sounds like a great routine to me. How do you define success?
Success is achieving one's goals and hopefully securing a, a, an acceptable future for yourself and your loved one.
Most impactful book you've ever read?
Probably the Bitcoin Standard.
Where or who is your go-to place to learn more about Bitcoin?
Um, I think just Austrian economics as a discipline is a way to understand it that is unparalleled.
What's one thing, so action or piece of advice, anyone listening or myself can take to up our game in an area of expertise of yours or an area that you've been thinking about lately? What's something that people can do to improve, basically?
I think there's another coming revolution that we as a society are still trying to figure out, and it's the VR revolution. The metaverse, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is coming. And if you haven't seen Ready Player One, it might give you a taste. But that this technology is coming very slowly, much slower than I thought it would, but it is now emerging. And I think it'll change the way that we interact with each other. And I think that's very interesting. So I would recommend learning about this emerging paradigm of virtual reality.
And do you think, or in what way do you think that relates to Bitcoin, if any? Because I've thought about that as
I
well.
think it is the continued use of the internet, this system of um, communication that is much farther beyond than communication like you and I having a conversation. It's the moving of information around
Mm-hmm.
that has become so frictionless that it is now changing the paradigm of all of the things that we do in our lives is now being morphed by the internet. So they're both similar things that are happening that are just very different also.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a question that you'd like to see added to this list?
Um, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
it was great. I've listened to this over and over again. Every single time I hear it, it's almost the same questions, I think, and every
Yeah,
single time it surprises me. So
yeah.
I
I've
think you're doing a great job with it.
Thanks, man. I've started to cull some of them just because I just find they're a bit boring, and the answers are often the same. So I think it's time for a bit of a refresh. But this is the last part now. It's word association. So if you've listened before, then you know the drill. I'll say a word. You tell me the first thing that pops in your mind. Satoshi Nakamoto.
Genius.
Government.
Wary.
Hash rate.
Blowing up.
The individual.
Sovereign.
Security.
Difficult.
Ego.
Useful.
Greed.
Um, that's innate.
Stacking sats.
Got to do it.
Fiat currency.
Trash.
Guns.
Protection.
Altcoins.
Trash.
Pizza.
Uh, Delicious, but full of carbohydrates.
Socialism.
Uh, Dangerous, but sounds good.
Family.
One of the most important things.
Trump.
Crazy.
Future.
Unknowable.
Libra.
A conversation starter.
Gold.
Windy.
and Bitcoin.
The future.
Well, Ben, I think we could probably chat for another hour and a half, but I know you got a day ahead of you, so maybe we'll have to pick that up. I'll take you up on that offer to have another chat some other time. But was there anything else that you wanted to chat about or cover or talk about before we sign off here?
No, I don't think so. And when I reached out to you to say, hey, you want to chat anytime, I was also trying to speak to your listeners as well. I'm still trying to navigate the space, and I learn new things every day, and I'd love to have a conversation. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at MRCOOLBP, and my DMs are open, and I love this conversation. So I really appreciate you having me on and working with the time. I know it was a little difficult to schedule. So.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed it. So I wish you all the best. Keep up the good work. Look forward to seeing some written output in the very near future. But until we speak next time, take care and good luck with everything.
All right, awesome. Thanks, John.
Okay, take care, brother.
All right, you too.
Bye bye.